Hey everyone, just opening up the Zoom meeting right now, so hang tight.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. How are you doing?
Okay, cool. I'm doing well.
Perfect, perfect. How's your day been so far? We're gonna get started pretty soon, just opening the floor for everybody.
Cool. It was election day, so I didn't work my normal day job today, which was nice.
Oh, I see.
Um,
Did you go out and vote?
I am not a US citizen, so I can't. If I could, I probably would have, but I can't.
I see. Yeah, like I also had been busy, heads down at work, so kind of just, this is like the only thing else on my mind today, just getting the meetup going. So
Awesome.
this looks cool. I had been kind of looking at it and I thought like this was a interesting meetup. So excited for how this is going to turn out.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it'll go well. And do you mind actually if I try sharing my screen?
Yeah, go for it. This is the time to do all that. Like I said, I'm just setting the whole thing up right now.
Actually, let me see if I had to click share sound. Okay. Cool. You see this okay, right?
Yes, I do. Yeah, it looks great.
Okay, cool. That's all I needed to check.
All right, so it looks like we're in good standing right now. I'll go ahead and give like a few more minutes just to let people come in.
Yeah.
If anybody, is on this call right now who wants to, say hello, network at the beginning of this call, feel free to do so.
I'm not good at networking, but I can just introduce myself. I'm Lindsay. I'm in a coding bootcamp right now. I just learned JavaScript. I'm going into React. I have known about p5.js for like over a month and been interested in it, but I didn't really know how to get into it. So when I saw this meetup pop up, I was like, yes, I really want to make something. So yeah, I'm excited.
Awesome. That's super cool. I hope I can give you a good introduction into it.
That is really cool. Anyone else want to speak up? I try to be a little bit more, attentive, and I want to make sure people are being able to ask questions. So feel free to speak up if you're able to. Okay, I guess like we'll go ahead and get started. I think there are more people on the way, just like looking and just notifying everybody I know. But with that said, I'll go ahead and just make a quick intro here for those who are new, and then I'll transition over to your presentation today, Jiwon.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so basically this group is JavaScript LA/HackBuddy. And I guess Zoom's not allowing me to share my screen, but I've done this presentation several times now, and I think like people kind of get the idea. One question is that where do you go to get the video afterwards? And so it's youtube.com/hackbuddy. I'm gonna put a link for that in the Zoom channel. So feel free to make sure that you get that link and you try it out. And then one other thing too is that I'm usually on LinkedIn if people want to connect with me and just network. I think like networking is really important. I've found that it's been really helpful for my career as well. And so the more people that I got to meet over time, the more opportunities I had and like jobs I was able to get. So I want to kind of like just do the same for others. So here is the link to the YouTube channel in the Zoom. And then here is my LinkedIn. And I'm just going to put this in here. I think it's better if I just type it because it's doing a weird formatting thing. So that's my LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me there and ask any questions, especially if you're trying to figure out what you want to do next for your coding career, and I'll try to help you out. So with all that said, let's go ahead and dive into your presentation, Jiwon, if you're ready.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for having me. I guess I'll give a little bit of an introduction about myself. My name is Jiwon. And currently my day job is working at Codecademy. If you might be familiar with it, Lindsay, if you're in coding boot camps and stuff, but I'm a senior curriculum developer there in the web development domain. So I basically make a lot of the courses that you might be seeing on the platform. And I also teach at NYU as adjunct every now and then. I guess a little bit of a backstory, I guess it's relevant for those people who are learning how to program now. I graduated from NYU in undergrad with a computer science and visual arts double degree. And then I went to a program called Interactive Telecommunications Program at NYU Tisch. So basically, like the 2 years that I spent there was doing a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be giving you guys an introduction to. So basically using coding to do, how do I say this? This is a question that I was going to ask everybody at the beginning of the presentation. So, but basically using coding to make art. That's what I've been doing during my grad program. And then I started working at Codecademy after that. And so I will share my screen. But before I actually do that, obviously, the more you guys speak up and if you have any questions, I'd be able to tailor the way that this workshop goes that way. So please don't be afraid to ask me any questions, whether you think it might be small or not. Any question is a good question. So with that, I'll go ahead and share my screen and I will try to keep my eyes on the chat. But if I miss anything, please don't be afraid to unmute your mic and ask me your questions. Okay, so the first thing that I guess I would like to address for everyone who's here is what even is creative coding. I think this workshop was titled Creative Coding with p5.js or Introduction to p5.js, but really p5.js, we'll get to what it is later as well. But the essence of it is really what is this creative coding business that we are here for today. And so I want to ask that question for all of you guys to kind of hear what you think of creative coding. And some of the follow-up questions that I think would be a little useful for us to talk about is also, how can you apply creativity coding? Like, is that even possible? Like, what are the different ways that you could do that? And also, what is the goal of creative coding? If anyone has any thoughts on this, you're welcome to hear them.
Well, I've seen a lot of p5.js examples, and it's all very visual, using JavaScript to make visual animated coding.
Yeah, that's definitely one of them. Anyone else?
I mean, like when I think of creativity, I mean, like my mind more goes towards like Figma and stuff. So that's me being creative.
So I think same sort of similar point that both of you are raising is that it has some sort of a visual element to it. And that's definitely one of them. But I guess like the broader picture of it, and this is, by the way, my own definition, please don't use it as like the definition of creative coding. But in my mind, it really is using coding to express an interest or a passion or a message. So really like creative coding doesn't have to be limited to just, making something visually fascinating. Even if you make like a website with just pure HTML but you put your passion and your creativity in it. And the point here is that the mindset that you're putting into programming isn't something that needs to be useful. You don't have to make an app that helps X million number of peoples out there for you to be in this creative coding mindset. It's really using coding as like a paintbrush to paint a picture that you want to make. So I think that kind of mindset does hopefully break your I guess like your mindset about what coding has to be. It doesn't have to make anything. You don't have to make anything useful with it, although you can make something useful with it if that's your intention. I have a couple of slides going from this point on, some examples of creative coding. The first thing that I think I wanted to mention here is that creative coding kind of originated from this mindset of algorithmic art. Algorithmic art meaning that you follow a certain set of rules and processes to create a picture or create a piece of art. And the person that always gets mentioned when we talk about algorithmic art is Soluit. And I don't know if you guys seen his work around, but his work of art wasn't in creating pictures and like painting like this one version of picture, but he always creates these like sets of rules that you have to follow, that being create a canvas, paint it black, start drawing lines from here, how many lines do you draw from there, and so on. So that really, if you think about it, that is basically programming. That is basically coding, almost like a pseudocoding. So I've got these examples of his art in here. And as you can see, it's very much like something you could imagine you being able to program using things like p5.js or any sort of visual programming languages. Some other things, I think this is the most closest to what you guys were imagining when we say creative coding, is basically generative art, meaning that you kind of, it is a continuation from the algorithmic art, but basically you're using program to make something generative, something that you set a predetermined set of rules and you let the computer kind of run with it and adapt to the visualization based on the rules that you've set. And other kinds of generative art or creative coding that you might also be familiar with is data visualization, right? So you can have visualizations of, for example, this is one of the pieces that I really like by Jill Hubley, that she's using a map box, which is a map API, to kind of visualize all the trees in the New York City streets and categorize them by species. You also have Georgia Lopi is one of my favorite data visualization artists. She does a lot of these organic data visualization as well, but a lot of her work is on making data visualizations and data really accessible to you. And then moving on to some other things that you might also, this is like a growing thing that I see as a trend. And I see so many of these like tech art boutique galleries opening up and all over the world. But you can also think about creative coding as creating immersive experiences. Obviously, I feel like these take a lot of more time and effort to get produced. But you have things like Team Labs, interactive experiences, or there's also a place called Art Tech House, which they also host a lot of immersive experiences where they use a lot of projection mapping, and some of those artists who make generative visualizations showcase their work there too. And then the next thing that I also wanted to show you is that creative coding doesn't have to be just in your screen. It can also be programming little physical components and putting it together to create a whole immersive or interactive installations. And this is a piece, these are series of mechanical mirror pieces that a professor at NYU actually has been making them for years and years, Daniel Rosen, and he makes mirrors out of non-reflective materials. So I can play a very tiny little bit of it.
Camera, they actually build it.
A lot of research, practice, and patience.
It was just out of graduate studies where I learned how to do some basic electronics and some programming, but definitely I wasn't prepared to create a complex piece that required controlling cameras and moving close to 1,000 motors.
So you can, the point of me showing you this is that creative coding really doesn't have to be within your computer, but you can think of them even in a bigger and broader scale, and anything that moves with program is also part of creative coding. Oops. How do I move away from this? Okay. And the other thing that I wanted to showcase is that there are also interactive films that are up and coming, also now more so nowadays than ever. Basically, mixing in more of a static form, which is a film, and mixing in programming in between it. And one of the, I guess the most popular thing that you might have heard of is Netflix did this Black Mirror episode, I think it was called Bandersnatch, that put in points where users or viewers can select which direction they want the story to go, right? So that can't be done with some level of programming, because you can have like X number of video files, but it needs to have a rule to stitch what after the other, right? So that's what I wanted to kind of give you guys a sense of what creative coding is before we get into p5.js. And now actually moving into p5.js and introducing you guys to what even it is, what it is. p5.js is an open source JavaScript library for creative coding that provides us with tools to simplify the process of creating interactive visuals with code in the web browser. So there are some key points here, one of which is that it's open source. That meaning that the whole source code of the whole library is open on a GitHub repo. So if you wanted to go ahead and check out what they run behind the scenes in the library itself, you're free to do that. You can also make contributions to the library, whether it be not code. You can also contribute to the documentation and to translations of the library as well. And other things to point out here is that it's a library that will make it simple for you to start drawing on the web browser. And that is exactly what we're going to try to do today. And in order for you to get started with it, you can go to the p5.js website by going into p5.js.org. And I will post this link on the chat if you guys just want to click on it. And they actually have a really good references and a couple of like getting started links and example code links in there as well. So it is, I think, the #1 source to go to when you're starting your journey into p5.js and creative coding. And there are a couple options that you can use to start programming and using p5.js library here. You can go to the download section on their website, and then you will see there is an editor version of here, which we're going to be using for this workshop. And then you also can download the complete library or use the CDN link. So whatever workflow that you are more familiar with, you have a couple of options here of using, the downloaded files or using a CDN link. But today, for the convenience of everyone, I think it'll be useful for us to click on this p5.js editor button or go to editor.p5.js.org. And I'll also post this link here. You will have to create an account if you want to save your sketches. But basically, this is a web editor that has all the code and the libraries embedded in here that you will need to start coding something in p5.js. And we're going to talk about the overall structure of a p5.js project together in a bit. But I think I created this account years ago, so I can't remember what the sign up process is like, but I know that it's not obnoxious at all. I think you can even log in with your GitHub. They have a GitHub OAuth, I think that's what I remember. Or it's like as simple as just doing like an email and name sort of thing. And the only thing that it will let you do if you have an account is save your sketches in here, which is pretty neat. This is just another slide about how you can use it using script tag, which I talked about. So before we get really into kind of getting our hands dirty and start programming, I wanted to explain a little bit about how a p5.js works, p5.js project works. So essentially, it's kind of like any other website that you have ever created. It needs an HTML document and it needs a JavaScript file, and you can also have a CSS file if you want, although it's not strictly required because we're going to be doing a lot of the visual creation in the JavaScript file itself. And so the way that it basically works is that however you use any other JavaScript libraries, you've got an HTML file, and in here you have script tags in the head section where it's included the links to the p5.js library itself. So you've got these script tags. This one is the main p5.js library, and there's a separate library for the sound library. But the sound library, we're not going to worry too much about, but I can talk about it at the end if anyone has any questions about that. And then here you'll also see in your sketch files in the p5.js web editor, you have a sketch.js file, which is going to be the file that we're going to be using the most today. And then we've got style.css file that you can use you can do any sort of CSS styling if you want to. Okay, so there are two sort of big structural things that you might want to be aware of when we start programming in p5.js. And if you're creating a p5.js project with the p5 web editor, you will see that there's already two functions in here for you. There is a function called setup, and there's a function called draw. So the setup function is a built-in p5.js function that is used to set the sketch's initial state. So this is kind of like, taking care of all the initial things that you might want to set. One being the canvas size. meaning the size of the visualization that you want to create. That can be, set in number of pixels, or we can talk about other built-in variables as we get started during this. And also maybe if you wanted to set a set background color to start with, that's also somewhere where you can do it. The setup function will only run once at the very beginning of the web page loading, meaning that if you refresh, the setup function will run again. But if you keep the web browser running, the setup function is not going to run anymore after that. It is also, it is also a function that will not explicitly be called. So, when you normally create a custom function and you call it function, my function, you have to call it somewhere in order for it to be executed. The JavaScript library will pick up wherever you define your version of setup function and run that as the setup function to be run when your web browser loads with the p5.js library. And the other function that will be generated for you when you're using the p5.js web editor is the draw function here. The draw function is basically where we're going to be doing most of our drawing in, as per name says. This is also a p5.js function that also is not called explicitly, so that you just have to do whatever you want to do inside the draw without running it after the function definition. It will run immediately after the setup function is run. And the key point here is the draw function will run in an infinite loop. So whenever you do everything here, a draw function is going to run in a continuous loop. So I'm going to add a little bit of a console log statement here for us to kind of see that. So inside the setup function, I'm going to add a console log statement and say setup function running. And then once we hit run, which is this magenta button here on the top left corner, it says setup function is running. And then I'm going to add a console log statement here, and it's going to overburden our console output, but I'm going to do it anyway and say in draw. So we should see, maybe we won't even see this running because this is going to soon overtake all of our console window. Well, it's not, because it's just going to add numbers next to it, which is nice. So we've got setup function running, and now you can see this number increasing quite linearly, but continuously saying in draw. Okay, before I crashed anything, I will get rid of that and run this again. Cool. So as I mentioned here, the other function that will auto-generate for you in the setup function is this create canvas function. This is basically what's creating this gray box next to you in the preview window. So if I were to, what it says is that the first argument of the create canvas function is the width of the canvas. And the second argument of the create canvas function is the height of the canvas. This is basically you saying, I want to have a drawing board, give it to me in 400 pixels wide and 400 pixels high. So if I were to change this number and say, I want it to be 340 by 480, then it will, and then you press run again, that's what we're going to get. My window is a little bit zoomed in, so that's why you see it quite spilling over. But that's what you're going to get, and this is in pixels. There is a p5.js built-in variable called window width, and you will see it turn in magenta if it picks up that it's a built-in p5.js variable, and window height, which are two neat variables that I normally use when I create canvas. And if you want to make a full width and height browser size visualization, it will basically pick up the window width and window height of your browser window width and window height, and then put that number in for you. What that means is that if I start my window like this and press run again, it's going to adapt to that width and height of my preview window and create a visualization that takes up the whole page of the browser. Does anyone have any questions so far about the basic functions here with the setup and the draw and the create canvas?
I just really like it. I really like the presentation so far. It's really well done.
Thank you.
But yeah, just and then I guess we can go to Jason's question.
Why was there a timer function for draw?
I was going to ask the same thing.
What do you mean timer function?
Or I guess, why is it a loop that runs all the time?
Before
Yeah.
there is a console.
Yeah, before there was a console. I put that in there to show you that it's in an infinite loop. The reason why it is an infinite loop, we will see, is that p5.js is very specific for creating animations. So if you put everything in the anything that you want to animate in the draw loop, what will happen, and this is kind of like skipping over to a couple of slides ahead, but if you increment a one number to a variable in an infinite loop, that number will continuously be added and therefore creating an animation. Because what animation means is that in each frame of things, you are creating a variance so that what the next frame, it is a little bit different. And that gradual addition of frames is going to create something that makes it move, something that looks like it's moving. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that sounds
Yes.
right. Mhm.
Cool. And again, this is all skipping over a little bit, and I have slides for explaining frames in a bit, so bear with me. And we're going to be using the draw function mostly to do static images for first, and then we'll move on to animating those things. Okay, so now that if everyone's kind of clear about the setup function and the draw function and the create canvas function, the next thing that I'm going to talk about is how are we going to place things on this canvas, right? If you're holding up a brush in front of your canvas, you can kind of like maneuver your hand, hopefully, to wherever you want your paintbrush to land on that canvas. Since we can't do that, I mean, if anyone knows how to do that, let me know, but we can't really kind of point on our screen and say, I want this here. We're gonna have to use numbers to put to specify the exact location of where we want things to be here. So I have linked here in these slides, which by the way, I will share with you after, where it's a very simple thing. It's a grid, and wherever you move your mouse around, you see the X and Y coordinates of where your mouse is on the canvas. So in p5.js, and this is also kind of true for a lot of the visualization libraries, the top left corner of your canvas is always at 0, 0. It is the origin point of the canvas. There will be different ways you can set that otherwise, but by default, the coordinate system is going to start at the top left corner, and it will increment as it goes towards the right in X, and it will increment as you go towards the bottom in Y. So that's, the Y is the thing that catches a lot of the people, because when we say Y in height, if you go up, it increases in number. But in a p5.js and in a lot of visualization libraries, it is kind of flipped so that the further down you go from the URL bar to toolbar, the higher the Y number is going to be. And I think this is going to be very, you might be able to get it quick if we start creating shapes in our sketches, which we'll get to very, very soon. So there's a bunch of shapes that you can draw with p5.js, and they are conveniently created. There are functions conveniently built for us by the p5.js library. The number one page that I always go to in the p5.js.com website is the reference page. There is reference for all the functions that you can use with p5.js in here. And there's a category called shape that you can go to. And there's a whole bunch of different shapes that you can use and you can create with those functions, with their functions. But today I'm going to focus mostly on the 2D primitives here. So I guess now, thank you for your patience. We can start creating shapes on our canvas. What we're going to do here is that we're not going to worry about the background function right now, but in our draw loop or draw function, inside of it, I'm going to draw a circle. And the function to use to draw a circle is called circle, which is really nice. So we have this circle function here. The circle function takes 3 arguments, one for X coordinate, one for Y coordinate, and one for the size, because a perfect circle has same width and height. So I'm gonna just put in some random numbers in here. I'm gonna say my X coordinate be 100, my Y coordinate be 200, just to show you the variance there. And I'm gonna give my size 150. So what I'm gonna tell p5.js is to basically draw a circle at 100, 200. So at X location of 100 pixels, Y location of 200 pixels, of a size 150 pixels. So 100 here meaning that 100 pixels from the left side of your screen or left side of your preview window, and 200 pixels from the top of your preview window. I'm going to click run, and this is where our circle is being drawn. One thing to point out here is that the X and the Y location that you're defining for the circle function means the center of the circle. So the center of the circle right here is 100 pixels away from the left side of your screen and 200 pixels away from the top of your screen or your preview browser. And the total size, meaning the radius wherever you measure it, it's going to be 150 pixels. Okay, so next, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try drawing a square. And that function for that is square, which is also nice. And I'm actually gonna draw my square on the same location because I'm trying to make a little point here. So I'm gonna say I wanna draw a square at 100 pixels for X location and 200 pixels for my Y location, which is the same location right here in the middle of my circle, and 200 pixels for the size, so the width and height of the square. And I'm gonna press run, and then you will see here that the top left corner of my square is exactly at the center point of my circle. So that's because the X and Y coordinates that you're defining for the square, or for that matter, any rectangular shapes that you're going to be drawing, the X and Y coordinate you will be passing into the function is the top left corner of the shape. So that, if you're familiar with Adobe Suite or anything, is what's called anchor point, meaning the point where the shape is going to be anchored on. Wait, that's okay. I hope that made sense. But basically, that's where the shape is being drawn. It's also when you want to explore kind of shape transformations and that kind of stuff, where it's going to rotate on. So it's kind of like putting a pinpoint on the top left corner, and then like that will be where it's going to rotate around. And so next thing that I want to do is basically show you the variances of the circle and the square shape, right? So variance of the circle shape is an ellipse. So circle is basically when the ellipse has a perfect width and height, or perfect, the same radius all the way around the center point. And the way to create an ellipse is, again, everything is quite self-explanatory when it comes to shape functions, or most functions in p5.js for that matter. And this ellipse function is defined with, used with 4 arguments here. The first one is also going to be the X coordinate. The second one is going to be the Y coordinate. The third argument is going to be the width of the ellipse. So I'm going to give it, let's give it 200 here. And then the fourth argument is going to be the height of the ellipse. So for that one, I'm going to give it 50. So based on what I've written here, the center of my ellipse should be the same center as my circle that we drew previously. And the width of the ellipse should be 200, and the height of the ellipse should be 50. So if I go ahead and draw this, then you should see an ellipse appear on top of my circle. And the center point is still the same, same as the circle function, because that's what we kept these variables the same, or kept these numbers the same. And then you should see an ellipse that's slightly wider and shorter than the ellipse and the circle. Another thing that I want to point out here is the order of which the shapes are drawn, right? So you see that the circle that we drew on line 8 is beneath the ellipse that we drew on line 9, and also beneath the square that we drew on line 11. So the logical deduction that most people can make here is that the later you call the function, the more it will be more on top of things. Does that make sense? That's because, with any sort of programming languages, it runs from top down, right? So when you have a function that is being drawn earlier than the other ones, that's going to be further back in 3-dimensional z-index surface, if that makes sense. Does anyone have questions here so far?
Are you like able to kind of like control the flow as to like when stuff gets drawn? I'm pretty sure like you're gonna eventually get to that or something. Or I guess
you
like
just have to change the order. That's the simplest way.
The simplest way, okay, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But like I could imagine like other functions or arrays or something like that. Then you kind of queue up.
You can't really do a queue. There isn't like a built-in queue function. You can create your own queues using JavaScript, or you're using like an array to kind of push and pop out of things. But that's not something that's built in with p5.js. I'd say that the simplest thing is make sure that the order is how you want it to appear. And what we're going to do later is you can also use if statements in here or for loops in here so that you can group a bunch of things together if you want to, or if you want to give it conditional to basically say, I only want this function to be colored this way or to appear in this place when certain conditions met. But since the draw function is also running in an infinite loop, that's something that I would advise people if they want to do anything super fancy in here, because if you do any complex functions within the if the draw loop, then it's going to run infinitely, then you can see how that might add up. So if you wanted to kind of control and say, I want actually my circle to appear on top of everything else, then my first advice would be to call the circle function last.
All right. Yeah, that's
cool.
good.
Anyone else? Okay, then I am going to move on, and I'm going to also draw a line. So anything that comprises of even a circle is like consistent of a lot of small lines or a lot of points. The way that we can create a line is also using a function called line. For a line, if you think about it, you would need 2 points to connect a line, right? So that also means that our arguments for a line function is going to be 2 sets of points, meaning there is going to be 4 arguments in here. One for the x coordinate of our first point or a starting point. I think I'll give it 300 here. And then the starting point's y position, so I'm going to give it 100. And then the ending points position, x position, which I'm going to say 200. And then the ending points y position, which I'm going to give it 200. So we can press run, and this is our little line in here. So it's going to start from where the x is at 300 pixels from the left axis, and where the y coordinate is 100 pixels away from the top axis. And then we're ending actually here. So even though the line looks like it's being drawn from here to here, from bottom left to top right, programmatically wise, we're starting from the top right point and then going down to bottom left point. And so these are only a few of the shape functions that p5.js has available for you. And if you wanted to go try them out, you can obviously click on these functions and then read the documentation. They have some examples of how the function is being used. There's multiple different ways, multiple different numbers of arguments that you can give it in here. And they have a pretty thorough documentation for most of their functions in here. So the next thing that I want to move on here is one thing that I personally don't like much about where our current drawing is at is the fact that everything's grayscale. There's no color. And so we're going to talk a little bit about color and making our visualization a little more interesting. So the first thing that I want to talk about here is this function that was also created for us when we opened up our p5.js web editor, is the background function. So what the background function does, as name says, it colors the background or the actual, the foreground color of the canvas. Okay, so here we have a number that says 220, and there's only one number here. When you use one number in any of the coloring functions, meaning the background function, we're also going to see other functions like the fill function and the stroke function. It means that you're going to be using a grayscale value that ranges from 0 to 255. So if you're putting in an integer or like an actual number inside of any of the coloring functions, you're using RGB notation. And this actually is being translated behind the scenes as 220, 220, 220. So it's saying the red value, the green value, and the blue value are the same, meaning that they're going to be in grayscale. Actually, I'm going to go to my slide that is explaining this. So the main styling functions that we're going to be using today is the background function, the fill function, the stroke function, but you can also turn off fill or turn off stroke. with the no fill function and the no stroke function. And as I was explaining here in terms of colors, you can use a grayscale notation. So using one number here to mean that you have the same values for red, green, and blue. You can also use RGB notation here with 3 numbers, one for red value, one for green value, one for blue value. You can also, if you're familiar with CSS, use any of the CSS defined or the named color values in string, meaning that you surround the word with quotation marks, and use words like red, blue. I think there's also corn blue or cornfield blue or something like that. Anything that you can use in CSS, you can use in p5.js as well. Or you can also use a hexadecimal value with a pound sign before the number, before the hexadecimal numbers and surrounding it by quotation marks. I think for most of our stuff today, we're going to be using RGB value because I think that for me, it's like the simplest thing to think about when we do color. Because if you wanted to create our background red, and sorry for making it bright red, then we just need to do 255, 0, 0. So giving full value for our red value and none for green and blue. So if I go ahead and do this, our canvas is going to be bright red. And that's hurting my eyes. So I'm going to make it black. So if I wanted to make it black, you can do 0 or you can do 0, 0, 0. There are certain values of putting the background function in the setup function instead. And that's going to come a lot more apparent when we start animating things. So I'm going to save it for now. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to try styling each of my shapes here into different colors. So for my square function, I'm going to be putting in a fill function above the square function. So all the styling, all the coloring that you're going to be doing inside p5.js, you will want to set the style for everything that follows beneath it. So if I create a fill function here, if I call a fill function here above all of my shapes, and I'm going to give it a green color, so I'm going to say 0, 255, 0, what will happen? I kind of already gave a little spoiler, but what do you think will happen if I put a fill function here and if I run this?
It'll change the color for the square versus circle and line.
Yeah, so it'll change for everything, but it won't change it for line because line doesn't have a fill color, right? Because line is just a stroke. So if I go ahead and run this, all of my shapes have this very, very neon green color. But then if I call this fill function again after my square function and right above my ellipse function, and let's color this blue. So 0, 0, 255, what will happen is that only the square is going to be green, but the two shapes here that have a fill is going to be colored in blue. So if you wanted to set all the shapes here into different fill colors, then you will have to call a fill function before that shape is called. So I will make this one red, 255, 0, and 0. So now my square is going to be green, my ellipse is going to be blue, and my circle is going to be red. And if you wanted to set styles for the strokes, and by the way, let me change this back to white. All the shapes by default will come with 1 pixel thickness stroke around it, around the shape. If you wanted to turn off stroke, what you can do is you can call the no stroke function. And this is camel case, so the capital S for that stroke word there. And you go ahead and run it. It's going to get rid of all the strokes, all the black strokes around all the shapes. But they will also make our line disappear because a line is only consistent of a stroke. So if you wanted to bring back the stroke, you have to call the stroke function before the line is being called. And then this is where you would put in the color for that stroke. So if I say 0 here inside of my stroke, we'll get our black line back. But if I wanted to make my line, let's say purple or pink, 255, 0, 255, then we're going to get this magenta colored line. You can also set the thickness of the stroke by saying, by calling the stroke weight function. So stroke weight with capital W because it's also camel case. And here you can input in the number of pixels that you want the stroke to have, your stroke thickness to be. So if I put in a number 5, my stroke is going to be 5 pixels thick. And if you wanted to make like this is actually a cheat way of creating a rounded rectangle. So if I make this a really, really thick line, it's going to have curved edges for the beginning and the end of the line. So if you wanted to make it like really thick, you can use this to make like a rounded rectangular shape. Cool. This looks a little more interesting now that there's color involved. Any questions here?
No, like I said, you're doing a great job. I really love it. I think like just the main things, I guess, you know, like when I see this, I kind of feel like, you know, and I'm thinking kind of more from a programmer standpoint. I see a lot of repetitiveness. So I was wondering if there's like a way to like config some of this, like write it as a configuration and then send it.
Yeah, I don't think there is. It's p5.js is gonna be a little bit repetitive because you have to keep setting or resetting certain values. There isn't a way in one line to say I want this ellipse to also have this fill within the ellipse itself. So if you're setting different, you know, creating different primitives, or if you're doing like the recreation of a painting in p5.js, unfortunately, the code is going to be really long because a lot of it is going to be very manual, so to speak. But if you're creating multiple of the same shapes, there's obviously, you know, easier ways to do this, like using a for loop. And so actually, I think that's what we're going to do here next. And I'm going to create more like a pattern, a repetitive pattern for our canvas using a nested for loop. So if you're going to create a grid of shapes in a canvas, the general convention that you will see in a lot of the example code is that you will use a nested for loop, one to iterate over in an X direction and one to iterate over in a Y direction. So if you're, let's start here and say for let, I'll say X is equal to 0. And this is another thing, another p5.js built-in variable that I'm going to be introducing here. And I'm going to say until X is, as long as X is less than width. And width is also a p5.js built-in variable that signifies the width of the canvas. It is different from the window width value. And this is basically right now, as long as you don't move your preview browser around, it's going to stay the same. But after you set your canvas to window width, if you want to refer to the width of the canvas, or there's also, if there's width, there's also height. So if you're going to refer to the height of the canvas, I'd advise you to use width and height variables instead of window width and window height, because those two are going to be different depending on whether the browser window moves after it's been launched. So we're going to say our for loop is less when X is, it will continue to run when X is, while X is still less than width. And I will increment this X value by 50 because I want my grid to be skipping over every 50 pixels. I'll do something similar here inside for the nested one. So I'll say let Y is equal to 0, Y is less than height this time. I'll say Y is plus equals 50. So now we have a nested for loop that will skip over X every 50 pixels and it'll skip over Y every 50 pixels. And in here, I'm going to comment everything out here first, and then I'll say, I'm going to draw an square, let's say, and I'm going to have it be at X. I'm going to start at X comma Y. So wherever the grid is at, the top left corner of my square is going to be at X comma Y. And then I'm going to give it 40 so that I'm leaving 10 pixel gap between each square in the grid. And before I forget, I also give it a fill color, and I'm going to give it blue, 0, 0, 255. And if I run this, we get a grid of blue squares. So I guess that's one way where you don't have to do things repetitively, and you can use the benefit of for loops to create a grid of shapes. You can obviously put more things in here. So then if I do, let's say, a fill of, let's make it pink 255, 0, 255, and then create a circle here. And I'll keep the coordinate X comma Y the same, but make it a little smaller. So I'll give it 20 pixels for the size of my circles. Then we've got these circles appearing at the top corner of the grid. But notice here again that the center point, it looks a little bit off because the x comma y, or the x and y coordinates that we're passing into the circle function, is going to be used for the center point of the circle. So if you wanted this to appear right here in the middle of our rectangle or the square, we're going to have to do a little bit of math and think, okay, it's going to start from wherever the grid is starting. And because our size of our square is 40 pixels high, 40 pixels wide, we want it actually start in the middle of it, so that we'll have to plus 20 and also plus 20 to the y to bring it down 20 pixels. So once we do that, everything should appear in the middle. All the circles should appear in the middle of the square. And you can keep adding stuff in here, right? So this is kind of like almost like a pattern maker, so that like each of the pattern is defined by this 50 pixels wide and 50 pixels tall square, and it's going to be replicated over how much of our space that you have in your canvas. So we can do other things, like let's add a fill color. How do I make yellow? Let's try doing. Okay, green and blue. It's not red and blue. Okay, let's do green and blue. Let's see what it looks like. So 55, and then we'll do a ellipse here, and then we'll just also make it on top of this x plus 20, y plus 20, and then we'll give it 30 pixels wide and 15 pixels tall. Let's see if it's yellow. It's, I think, cyan. I think.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries.
Okay.
I wasn't super sure either. Yeah, it's 255 for red, 255 for green, and we have yellow. It's like, color theory class. You can learn how.
Sorry. Yeah, like I'm it's red and yellow. Red and
green.
Red and green. Yeah. Like it's a long day. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can do things like that and then start creating your own generative shapes in here. You can add things to this. You can, take things out. You can, this is kind of like gonna be a fun way to experiment with different kinds of shapes to see what kind of pattern that you can make with it. Another thing that I guess I want to kind of introduce here is that you can add alpha values to any of your colors. So if there's one value that you're using here in the background, the second value is going to be the alpha value. For our fill function, we have red value, green value, and blue value. But if you wanted to add a little opacity to it, right now and by default, this is going to be a little weird thing that is very P5 specific. But the alpha value is going to be 0 being transparent to 55 being opaque. So if I did 100, that's kind of actually 125. That's more or less in the center of it. So it'd be half opacity. So 50% opacity almost. So that you see that our color itself is blue, but now it's become a little bit transparent, so it's a bit more toned down. And that actually looks really interesting if you put opacity in other fill colors as well. So then now you're making things on top of stuff so that all the colors are kind of reflected on top of each other. And that's also one way where you can kind of experiment with how your output looks. So not only in the visual, but also like creating color combinations on top of each other too. Cool. Any questions here? If not.
So what are some yeah. Like I guess I'm asking a lot of questions, but it is an interesting presentation. I was just gonna ask you, so when I kind of looked at your GitHub just now, and I was just like wondering, like when you set this up, are you setting it up, with the HTML index.html, and then you're, you're working directly inside the sketch.js, and then the p5.js is just the library that like runs the code essentially?
In a way it is. So I think one thing that we can look at here is that the p5.js, the code that we have that runs p5.js is in a script tag in the body. So this is kind of one of those things where it is a little bit unconventional when you're doing other, scripting, when you're adding JavaScript scripts And most of the times you might be adding it in the header. But anything that contains p5.js code, the JS file, needs to be included in the body. That's because what p5.js library will do is that it will need the body to be created for it to insert in the canvas HTML tag into the body. So we can actually take a look here. I'll open the inspector, and if I go ahead and look at this, it's automatically generated a canvas element inside of our body. And also, this isn't a main because we are inside a p5.js web editor. But you will see here in the body, it's created a canvas with a default ID that the library provides. And that's where the p5.js, all the code that you're running is going to be running inside of. Everything's running inside of the canvas tag. So if you wanted to, you can style the canvas also like any other HTML element, right? If you wanted to create margins, if you want to create paddings, if you want to create frames around it, that's all possible. But to answer your question in short, it is the p5.js library that's going to run everything and generate that output in the canvas element.
All right, and the sound min.js, is that like a separate file?
Yeah,
is that like
so
an extension?
Yeah, so you don't need this in order for us to run the specific sketch. But if you wanted to do anything sound related, meaning like audio generation, audio visualization, that kind of stuff, you will need to put it in there. The p5.js web editor will put it in because it will give you everything that it has, so that you don't have to add more things into it. That's the only reason. But if you're working on this on your local computer using like VS Code or whatever, you only need to import in the p5.js main library unless you're going into the sound direction too, which by the way is also another whole interesting field.
Very cool, very cool.
Cool.
Yeah, keep going unless you're taking a lot of questions.
I'll wait a couple of seconds. But if no one has questions, we're gonna move on to making things move, which is another exciting part. So I feel like, I'm adding in a little bit of excitement bit by bit by creating shapes in there and then adding color, which I feel like a lot of people get really interested as soon as like we start putting colors into our canvas. We're gonna make it even more exciting by making things move. And this is the slide that I was alluding to when I think you guys asked questions about, how it runs and why it is an infinite loop. Why is there a timer function? So I guess a lot of the main purpose of why people choose to use p5.js is to create an animated generative visualization other than a static one. You can, of course, use it to create static visualizations like what we did here with our pattern generation. But you can use it very conveniently to create animations because our draw function runs in an infinite loop, meaning that every time this draw function is being executed, it is outputting a frame at a time. So that when things within a frame move over time, it's going to create an illusion that is a moving thing, which it kind of is because we see it moving. But point being that if you put things side by side, it will be static. But since it's showing to us on top of each other, it's going to make things move. And what we're gonna do for our next little coding exercise is we're going to create the bouncing ball, which is a very classic way of learning how to make things move on the p5.js canvas. I am going to get rid of all of this because all the code is saved separately, and you will have access to a similar version of what we're uncovering here today. So if you're also going to just if you're working on the p5.js editor, what you can do is you can save this and then just click File and create and get a new sketch, so that you can keep saving different versions of the sketch as we go on with our workshop. But I'm gonna get rid of everything in my draw loops. I'm not gonna get anything. I'm gonna get a blank canvas in here. I'm gonna add back the background function and say, give it a black background. And what we'll do here is I'm gonna create another circle, a new circle, and say, I'm gonna give it actually, I'm gonna use my width and height p5.js default values and make my circle exactly in the center of my canvas. So I'll say width divided by 2, comma, because width is the total width of the canvas. So if it's halfway, it's going to be at the center. And then I'll also say half height divided by 2. So it'll be also halfway in the middle of my canvas. And then I'll give it a size of 100 pixels. If I do that, I have this white circle right in the middle of my canvas. The way to make it move will be to make these two numbers, to these arguments here, not static. So we're going to use a couple of variables here and say let x pause, and then I'll also initialize y pause as variables. And then in the setup, remember that the setup function runs only once, and this is where you're going to be doing a lot of your initializations. If you want your circle to start in a specific location, you can do that in the setup function and say x pause is going to equal to width divided by 2. Oops. And y pause is going to equal height divided by 2. And then I'll replace these arguments here as x pause and y pause. And if I run this sketch, it shouldn't do anything special yet. And what we're going to do here is that we're going to give a little bit of an increment to our x pause values and our y pause values so that each time our draw loop runs, it will update the value a little bit by little bit. So here I'll say x pause is going to plus equals 5. So this means that every time the draw function runs, it's going to go 5 pixels towards the right, because whenever the x position is increasing, it will go towards the right, because like we said, the left part of the left axis of the preview window is where x is 0, and the right is where x is the width of the canvas. I'll do the same thing and say y pause is going to be plus equals 5. If we go ahead and run this, which direction do you think this will go?
Up.
Up. Are you sure?
Upright.
Upright? Are you sure? Sorry. Let's see.
Diagonal upper right too from Joey.
I think it went bottom
Down.
right, because the y, remember I said this, is flipped in P5. The y is 0 at the top, and when it increments, it goes towards the bottom. So if you want it to go up, what we'll need to do is do minus equals. So then it will go towards the top.
I was going to say, you almost have a James Bond gun barrel sequence going on.
That's cool. You can, that could be a challenge to recreate James Bond sequel thing, a simplified version without Daniel Craig. Why is y flipped? That's a very good question. I think it's generally kind of typically also, I don't think there is a good answer to this. It just happens so. But this is my theory. I think it's because things load from top to bottom, so that when things in HTML are loaded, if you have more content, it gets pushed to the bottom. That's how I think about it, and then make it kind of sound logical in my head. There isn't a particular reason other than the fact that the coordinate system itself, the top left corner is at 0, 0. So sorry. If it's it is definitely different from any Adobe Suite or any other visual softwares. And this is the one thing that's going to get a little bit difficult to get used to. Okay, cool. So the next thing that I want to do, unless anyone else has any other questions. Okay, the next thing I want to do is that once it leaves my canvas, my bowl isn't coming back to me. So what we're going to do is we're going to contain my bowl within the size of my my canvas so that it doesn't escape and bounces around the canvas. So it's kind of like we're going to trap our little bowl inside our canvas and make it bounce around, hence the name bouncing bowl. And there's multiple ways you can do here, but I'm going to be using a couple of if statements to trap my bowl inside. So there's different ways you can there are different places that you can put this in. You can do a check after the circle is being drawn. You can check after the positions have incremented or decremented. It doesn't make a huge difference because wherever you put it in, it'll be a 1 frame of a difference. So visually, you won't be able to tell whether things are done before it or after it. I'm going to add it right after I increment and decrement my x pause and y pause variables. And I'm going to say, if my X position goes to the right of my canvas, meaning out of my canvas towards the right. So that will be when my X pauses become greater than width. Then I'm going to say, make my Y pause go the other way. So how do I do this the other way thing, right? That is where we're going to put in another set of variables. I'm going to create two new variables, say let X speed and then let Y speed. And I'm going to set my X speed to 5 for now in my setup. And then I'm going to say my Y speed is going to equal to 5 also in my setup. And instead of these two 5 static numbers, I'm going to say X pauses plus equals X speed. And then Y pauses, I'm going to also just keep it plus equals for now. And then say Y speed. And then here, if we don't have anything in the if statement yet, so this should just run as expected, going to from the center to the bottom right corner. And inside of my if statement, when X pause is correct and become greater than width, what I will do here is I'm going to say I want X speed to flip, meaning that if it's going positively and increasing, I want it to decrease now. So as soon as it's hit the boundary, instead of increasing, I want it to decrease. So what I will do here is I'm going to say times equals minus 1. So originally, before my X pose reaches width, it's going to have a positive X speed of 5. And when an X pause has become greater than width, it's going to multiply minus 1 to it. So now it's going to increment minus 1. So what we'll see here is nothing because it goes beyond my X direction too. So we'll go ahead and add that in too. So I'll say if my Y pause has become greater than height, I'm gonna do exactly the same thing and say Y speed is times equals minus 1. So the same thing will happen. So if Y pause is greater than height, meaning that it's at the bottom of my canvas, then I'm going to say instead of incrementing it, now I want you to decrement. So we should see it bounce, but then above it, we have nothing catching that because we have no if statement that catches it. So you can add an or statement in here if you want. So say X pause. If X pause is also less than 0, I want it to flip the direction. So this meaning that it would have been going towards the left. So I don't want it to decrement anymore. I want it to increment. So minus 1 times minus 1 is 1. So it's going to increment and flip to the other side. Same here for Y pause. I'll say Y pause is less than 0. I want it to also flip the direction. So we have a bouncing ball that's never going to get out of my canvas box. Anyone have questions here or some things that you want me to try doing here? We have a cool from Ian.
That is pretty cool.
It's kind of like, I like to say it's like a DVD box thing, if you guys know what those are. Or like when your TV has some stretch to the bounce, that's going to be really hard. You know, like when your TV goes in sleep mode and all the logo goes around, that's kind of what it looks like. The stretch part, Jory, is going to be very difficult because the circle that we see here is static in border, by which it means that the border is defined. And if you wanted to stretch something like, you know, like the bouncy movement that you see in like a lot of these circle animations or a lot of any animations, it means that you have to break the boundary and bring it back up. Yeah, the key principle to animation. If you watch the video and try to apply all of the key principles of animation into your p5.js sketch, and if you accomplish all of it, you're going to be a master at this. By which I mean that all of those key principles of animation that you see are going to be difficult, but easing in and easing out is going to be a little simpler to do. And for that, I think I'm going to actually make my circle linear. So I'm going to make it move just horizontally like this. And actually, I think I'm going to leave this and then create another circle beneath it. And for easing in and easing out, the behind mathematical property of easing in and easing out is that if you start from here in the center and then you go from one direction or the other, you're gradually decreasing in speed. And I'm sorry to bring a bit of math into this, but there is a function, a trigonometry function that has this property of easing in and easing out. And if you're not familiar with trigonometry, we're going to have to take our journey down the memory lane and think about sine and cosine graphs, because those graphs are going to be, the values of those graphs are going to be by nature going to give us our easing in and easing out property. So I'll start actually from here, from scratch again, and create a circle where it's at the center of my screen. Since we're not doing any decrements, I can still do X pause, Y pause, and then at 100. But what I'll do for my X pause variable here is that I'm going to use a function called sine, which by the way is also a p5.js built-in variable. And then you can put in a value. Can we do a sine wave with same coding by stretching it out? Yes, we can. But I will start by doing the easing in and easing out here first. So the sine value, okay, let me actually Google Sine Graph so that we are all looking at the same thing. So when we look at any sort of a sine function, sine graph in here, oh, what is this? Maybe I should just go to Wikipedia. Sine. Okay, I can't find a really, not cosine. Okay, this should have a pretty graph. When we look at a sine function, a sine graph, we have on the x coordinate these are angles, right? But the y is bound by 1 being the maximum and minus 1 being the minimum. When we look at our p5.js sine function, what we're going to put inside of the argument of the sine is the angle, the x-axis values. So if you want the sine graph to progress, you will want the x value to increment over time. And here I'm going to use a very essential go-to built-in p5.js variable that I use called frame count. What this variable does is that it keeps track of how many frames your p5.js canvas has been drawn. So it's going to, when you first launch it, it's going to start from 1 and it go to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in a linear fashion. And I'm actually going to slow this down by multiplying a decimal number to this, because if you take a look at the sine function here again, pi is equal to 3.14 something, 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 something. I know people can recite multiple decimal points. I cannot, but it's basically 3.1, right? If I increment this by 1, it's going to skip over my graph very quickly. So if you want to get and visually see the easing in and easing out values, we will want to put in a number that is increasing decrementally. This also is another thing to point out here, which you might be able to deduce here, is that the value of the angle that you put in inside the sine function is in radians, meaning in pi. I'm sorry, I will try to save the all the mathematical details out as much as possible, but the output of the sine function is going to be between -1 and 1. So if I wanted to, I will need to times it by a bigger number so that my circle doesn't go back and forth in 1 pixel, because I don't think a lot of people can visualize that. So I'm just going to times this by 100, and that also means that our whole thing is going to now be between -100 and 100. So because I don't want it to go to the minus values, I'm going to plus 100. So now the whole thing is going to be a number that ranges between 0 and 200. And I think it is easier to see the effects of it when we run this. I'm going to make it a little faster. Do you see, can people see that it's easing in and easing out? Okay, I'm going to make it go all the way over. Actually, I'm going to use width divided by 2 here, and then width divided by 2 here again. So it goes through the whole width of my canvas. That feels a little more like a pendulum. Just to give us something to compare, I will do here another xpos. Let's create another variable quickly. Xpos lin. I don't know. And say xpos lin is going to be plus equals 10. Oh, it's in the same position. And then I'm going to have this start 100 pixels below it, which it does not work. X, Y. Am I missing something here? Did it go too far out? Y pause. Let's put in a static number. Ah. Oh no, I'm not seeing this. Okay, so that's showing up. Maybe I can't X pause plus equals 10. It's still not moving. Anyone see a thing that I missed? I think it's because I didn't initialize this. Okay.
Do you mind kind of walking through your code one more time?
So I have a variable here called xpos length. Oh, I'm not using it. Oops, sorry. There we go. Sorry.
All right.
Back in business. So that is a little bit too fast, but then I don't know if you can see the comparison here that we've got. And this also should be commented out. One circle that's has it easing in and easing out, and then another one that was linear. That's a little bit different in speed variation. I'm looking in the chat. Frame count is how you set your beat. For instance, American animation uses counts of 8 and Japanese uses 3s. Yeah, frame count isn't how you set your beat. Frame count just keeps track of how many beats it's played in that same lieu of metaphor. If you wanted to actually set your beat, so to speak, you can set the frame rate, and generally you should do this in the setup function. So you can use a function called frame rate with capital R. And then the thing that p5.js will try to do is that it will try to render 60 frames per second. But if I slow it down and say 15, you see that everything's slowed down. So it's like almost like a bit animation. So you can do things like you can decrease it even further and do like five frames every second, and it's going to be definitely a lot more jittery. If you don't define it, p5.js will try to run it as fast as it can. So we go back to something more like this. Any other questions?
So the sine function is basically what causes that to go back and forth, right?
Yeah, because the sine function, as what we looked at in the sine graph, it is like a pendulum. It goes in waves and it never goes above or beyond that fixed height, right?
Very cool. Very, very cool.
Yay.
I was actually trying out, like an editor on the side. And I was trying to like do the James Bond sequence. So like, I don't know like why I started doing it, but yeah, I was just like wondering, is it possible to like make that circle like become like super big when it goes to the right and then come back, or small when it goes to the right and then big when it comes back to the left?
Yeah, so you can use the same sine function in here, and you just need to make this size into a variable as well. So let's actually go ahead and try doing that. But it will also have to be relative to the x position, right? We'll do let's size is equal to, let's have it start at 50. And then we'll put this as size, and I'll get rid of this linear one because we don't need it anymore. And then we'll try doing size is now going to be something that we also want to use sine function for. And I'll just keep the frame count, all the stuff, our argument for the sine function the same. And then we can times, instead of doing our width here, you can do, actually, even if you use width here, because never mind, no, we'll use xpos here. So we'll do xpos divided by 2 and plus xpos divided by 2 so that it doesn't go below negative. Okay, that was very fast. And it's a lot of incrementing. So if you don't want it to, if you didn't want to like have it exactly match your position, you could make it like a quarter. So have the x position value, then it'll go a little less. And if you wanted actually to have a fixed number to start with so that it doesn't go back all the way down to 0, you could add another number here so that it goes small, but it will never be smaller than 50.
Yeah. I think it's starting to come together. Looks pretty cool.
Awesome. Okay, so anyone else have something that you want to see how it is done? If not, I think I have a couple of other things that I had prepared.
Oh yeah. Please continue with the presentation. I think we're just kind of like distracted you, but I think it's fun. Okay.
So the thing that I want to kind of also showcase here, the sine function wasn't part of the thing that I prepared, but I think is definitely a really fascinating thing to like, try to apply some of the animation principles into p5.js designing. The one other thing that I want to show here is I want to kind of talk about using random values. So random, when it comes to animations and when it comes to draw loops, is a little bit of a double-edged sword, so to speak, because you don't have to decide the value for yourself, but you risk it by making it very, very jittery or very chaotic very quickly. I use a lot of varies in there, and I'm going to actually reduce my frame count here, frame rate, so that I don't cause a shock for everyone. But instead of having my background be a static 0 value, I can use it. This is also a p5.js built-in variable. This behind the scenes is using the math.random, the JavaScript function that you might be familiar with. But there's also a p5.js version of it that you don't have to put the math dot in front of. So we'll use a random function, and we'll make it contrary to the default JavaScript random function. You can put in arguments in here. So if I put in one number, that will be the maximum value. So if I put random to 55, that means I'm going to get a number, a float number between 0 and 255, up to 255, but not including. So if I go ahead and do this, it's going to randomly generate a grayscale number every time the draw loop runs. And I'm looking at chat again and say, Joey says, so like say we use counts of 8, we can have 50 frames per second, but the draw loop is executed every 8th frame, and each frame in between would be considered an in-betweens. Is it possible to control this? You can surround the whole draw loop and say if frame count, and you can use modulus function to do, if I want to say run something every 10 frames, so that would be something like this, right? So say if frame count divided by 10 and the remainder is equal to 0, you wanted to do it. So that's how you would control the speed, so to speak. And you could have another if statement and say is equal to 1, is equal to 2. And that's how we could slot in, create like a, your own tool of these slots or these beats and put in animations within there. So that would be one way to do that. But sorry for deviating from that. Where was I? Random, right. And so using random, instead of using it in a background function and then causing, a little too much of a chaos, what I'm going to do is create what's called typically in like, generative programming, a random walk. So we're going to be creating a line, and we're going to have a line being drawn around the canvas in a random fashion. So I'm going to delete a couple of things here. I'm going to delete everything else except for I'm going to have let x pause and y pause. I'm going to have it start in the middle of the canvas. So at width divided by 2, height divided by 2. I'm also, instead of having a circle, I'm going to draw a line. So here I'm also going to say let px and py to mean previous x position and previous y position. And for now, I'm gonna have px equal to x pos and py to equal y pos. So they're gonna start at the same location. And so in my draw function is where I'm gonna do a line here. And I'm gonna say, draw me a line that is between previous x position, previous y position, x position, and y position. And instead of having my background here, I'm gonna move the background to setup. What this will do is that whatever we draw inside of our draw loop is now gonna draw on top of things without clearing it. So it's not gonna repaint and draw a new thing here, repaint and draw a new thing here. All the stuff that we're gonna be drawing is gonna be left as it is. And then inside of the line, what we'll do here is I'm gonna say x pos is going to plus equals a random value between 5 and 10, and y position is going to also increment a random value between 5 and 10. But each of these are using a new random call so that these two numbers are going to be different, and they're all going to be different for every loop as well. And then once that is done and being drawn, I'm going to say x pos is now going to equal to previous x, sorry, px is going to equal to x pos, what was x pos, and py is going to equal to y pos. And I don't get anything because my stroke is also black. Stroke is going to be set to white. And they're going in the same, more like this direction. I'm going to bring it back up. Actually, I think it's also increasing too fast. So I'm going to reduce this by between 0 and 3. And you should see it kind of like squiggle around in different places, and but generally towards the bottom, because we are not giving this random function a way to go in the negative direction. So you can also do that, and in p5.js's random function, you can also give it 2 numbers into the random function in here. So if I give it -3, -3, -3, what this will do is that now the minimum number I'm going to get is -3, and the maximum number I'm going to get from the random function is up to 3, but not including 3. So I'll do the same for my y pos random increment as well. Actually, that's not a lot of increase at all. Hold on. But you should see this like little squiggles that are happening around, and they're going around in like a random scribbly way. That's because how much ever it's going to increase x and y direction is up to the random function. And actually, let's actually make it a lot bigger. If we do this, get something more like this. So this is another way of like, letting your computer sort of draw on a random fashion. There is like going to be a case that the bigger the random number is, it's going to quickly go off of your screen. So unlike what we did with the bouncing ball, where we brought it back by adding or timesing -1 to our speed variables, what we can do here is if my x position goes up beyond width of my canvas, I'm just going to bring it to the left side. So what we'll do is that once it goes out, it's going to continue over to the left side of my canvas and start drawing there. So we can do that by doing x position is going and x, actually px and x position, they're all going to equal to 0. And we're going to do the same thing for when my x position is less than 0. Also do px is equal to px is equal to x pos, and they're all going to equal to width. And I'll do something similar for my y position as well. So if my y position is greater than height, and then then it's going to go py is equal to y pos is equal to 0. And if my y pos is less than 0, I'll go py is equal to y pos is equal to height. So once we do that, once it goes out, and we'll wait for a second to see if it will go out of my canvas, it's gonna, I don't know if you saw this, but it's like drawing to the bottom. So what should be above it is now being drawn on the top, on the bottom of it. So this is kind of also another technique of containing your drawing within the canvas in a way. if you have something like random walks drawing around the canvas. And the other thing that I want to do here is that, so if you see this nature of random walk or the random generated visualization that we've created here, it's very edgy. So it's doing this like a very, very sharp turn, because the next random value does not consider what the random values that come after it. So there's no relationship between each of the random values that are being generated here. There is another random function called noise that you can look up in the p5.js reference. But this is basically a random function that is based on Perlin noise. So if you're not familiar with Perlin noise, you can look it up. I think the Wikipedia article is actually really, really detailed about it. So the Perlin noise is basically a random number generator that is relational, meaning that all the random numbers are going to take into consideration numbers that came before it and numbers that are going to come after it. The short way of saying this is that if you want a random number, or if you want to generate random things that look a little more natural, more organic, and more smoother, then instead of using random, using noise would be the way to go here. And then so you can use this noise function, and inside of the noise, it takes in a small decimal number. So we're going to do something very similar to what we did for the sine function. And I'm going to use my frame count variable here as well, and times it by 0.01 for my x position. And the noise function, if you look at the reference page, it will tell you that it will output a number between 0 and 1. And since we can't really tell the difference between 1 pixel, I'm going to increment this, or I'm going to times this whole thing by 10 pixels. And I'm going to do something similar here for my y position. But one thing to note, if you're using a noise function, is that you want whatever the small number you're inputting inside of the noise to be different, especially if you're going to use it one for x pos and one for y position. That's because whatever number that you put inside the noise is called a noise seed, and that's going to determine how your noise or the randomly generated organic random numbers are going to be sequenced. So here for my y position, I do a frame count times 0.02 instead, but I can keep my maximum same and say 10 pixels. And that is way too fast, so I'm going to slow it down and say maybe 3 instead. But you see here that it's already kind of become a lot more wavier and a lot more organic. But here again, kind of the same thing that happened when we first put in one single number, one single argument for a random. It's not going in the negative direction. So what I will do here is I'm going to times it by 6 and minus it by 3, so that now the whole thing is going to be, actually, is that going to work? Times it by 6? No. So times it by 3 and minus it by, I can't do math right now. I think this will be the way to do it. Let's see. It's going, everything's going above. How do I fix this? Ah, there's a simpler way. So since this whole thing is going to be between 0 and 1, I'm actually going to take this whole thing. So instead of giving it between 0 and 1, I'm going to ask it to give it between -5 and 5. I'm going to put a bracket around the whole thing in here and do a minus 0.5. And then I'm going to get rid of those -3s. So what we have here is that we have a noise function that we're using with the argument as frame count times by 0.02, minusing the output by 0.5, and then timesing it by the maximum number that I want it to be. So that should hopefully come back at some point. Yeah, I think it's trying to come back, but it's not. I'm gonna maybe make it a little faster. It's not now just not going by the same direction. It's gonna come back around and do like little loops and stuff. But I hope that people are noticing the difference, the stark difference between just using random numbers in here versus using noise function in here. But you could, we could keep it the way it was before, and it's going to create like a really nice diagonal wave too. So that's also, something that you could do if that's the effect that you're trying to achieve. Does anyone have any other questions?
It's pretty cool. Again, like very well researched. A lot of good examples today. Thank you for talking about the Perlin noise function too. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's like my go-to when you want to have some level of random, but you still want it to go a little organic. I try to make it a little faster by increasing the number here, but it's not that much faster. Try 400. But it's gonna skip, that's not gonna have a great effect because it's gonna skip over every 40. So it is fast, but it's also a little bit breaking. So maybe I'll try 100.
It's a crazy spider web.
Yeah. Maybe 50 is gonna be a little better. So there's a little bit of like playing around with the numbers here involved, as you can see. Cool. I think that there's definitely a lot that I think would be useful for playing around with things. Okay. So then up next, I think the last little bit of practical thing that I have prepared is, this is all cool, like letting your computer drive your visualization and creating generative patterns and random patterns is all cool. But what if I want to do something where my mouse or the user's input matters to how the visualization is being created? So that's like my last piece of puzzle that I've prepared for today. And we're going to be pulling in mouse interactivity into our canvas. So I am actually going to get rid of all of this. Again, I will say that all of these code is going to be, they're all in the GitHub repo that I'm going to drop the link in a bit. But I will get rid of all of this. Goodbye, random noise. Oh, wait, the thing that I want to actually showcase here that I forgot to do is the effect of having the background in the setup. So because our background function is in the setup, the lines being drawn are staying on our canvas. If I were to put this in here in the draw, you'll just see this line move around, which could actually be what you want. So if you wanted to have something, maybe you want it to be a little bit bigger than this. Actually, I'm gonna just increase the stroke a little bit. Stroke weight, and I'm gonna set it to 10. Maybe this is something that you want. It kind of looks like a firefly little thing moving around as well. So this could be something really cool that you want to try. That's what you want. But if you want to like have those patterns remain on your canvas, that's the one function to move away from the draw function will be the background function. So you want that to be inside of setup instead of in the draw. But I will reveal my go-to trick for making anything moving look a little fancier. And that's putting in opacity in your background. So right now my background is background of value 0, meaning black. But if I put a comma and put some opacity here, like I'll say 15. Now we've got some traces that look like it's being drawn after because something shiny is moving around in the darkness. This is like my little one trick up my sleeve to make things look a lot fancier than it actually is. Okay, cool. So okay, now I'm gonna actually move on to putting in some mouse interactivity in here. And I'm gonna keep my background the same, but I think I will, what should I do here? Okay, I'm gonna make a little drawing tool. So I'm going to keep my X positions and leave everything in width and height. But I am going to keep my background. I'll just leave the opacity in here because these things are still gonna move around. And I'll revive my circle function. And instead of actually saying X pause and Y pause, I'm gonna use two p5.js built-in variables called mouse X and mouse Y with capital X and capital Y as my X and Y coordinates. And I'm gonna keep my circle to be, let's make it a little smaller, to 50. So now this was as simple as that. Using mouse X and mouse Y as my circle's X position and Y position. And now the center of your circle is going to move with your mouse. So using that sort of like, you know, thinking, I can make a paint tool using p5.js by moving background back into my setup. I'm actually going to get rid of my stroke. So I'll say no stroke in here as well in the setup, so that if I do no stroke in the setup for once, and if I don't use the stroke function again in my draw, it's going to turn off stroke for all these shapes that I'm going to be drawing inside of my draw here. Let's make it a little smaller. So this is like paint, except you can't change color. And we are going to get it to change color next. And so right now I have this white circle following my mouse around, and it's like I can paint stuff. If I wanted to have be able to change color, let's say to whenever I press the mouse on the canvas, there are some other built-in functions that the p5.js library is going to automatically run for you or attach for you in this case. And this is basically behind the scenes going to use JavaScript DOM events, meaning that, you know, all the mouse press, mouse click, what else is there, mouse move, all that kind of DOM related events are going to be usable within the p5.js library. And you can see, I believe, in the events section of the reference page, there's also same goes for the keyboard events. They're all listed out in here. You can use variables that are Boolean. It will return whether true or false, depending on events being triggered or not. But in our case, we're going to use one of the built-in functions, and I'm going to define outside of my draw loop, a draw function. It doesn't matter where you do the function definition. I typically do them after draw just to keep everything consistent, to make sure that setup and draw is above everything else. And I'll say function mouse pressed with capital P. It doesn't take any input, but inside of it is where you can define what will happen when a mouse press on the canvas is detected. So I'm going to say, I'm going to basically say when I have detected a mouse press on the canvas, I wanted to set a red value, green value, and blue value for my circle fill. So I'll say let red val, green val, and blue val, and they're all going to equal to 255 at the beginning. And in my draw, I'll say fill red val, green val, and blue val. So right now I shouldn't do anything new because I haven't changed anything. And in my mouse pressed function, I'm going to say red val, I want it to equal a random number between 0 and 255. And green val, I want it to equal a random number between 0 and 255. And blue value, that is between a random number between 0 and 255 also. So now if I click on my mouse on my oh, I misspelled random. If I click on my canvas, every time I do a click, it's going to give me a new color, but it's random. So it's kind of up to P5, whatever color it gives you. So we have a very, very simple drawing tool here. We could also make it change the size whenever we press press on my canvas. So I'll say let size, and I'll set it originally be equal to 10, and then replace my 10 in my circle to size. And at mouse press, I'll also say size going to equal a random number between 5 pixels and let's say 30 pixels. So then now every time I click on the canvas, the color is going to change, but so is the size of my brush. Anyone have any questions?
Yeah,
Like
super
Microsoft
cool.
Yeah, Microsoft
Yeah.
Paint. But a random
sorry.
version.
I was going to ask, do you have to set for your blue value the 0 to 255 or?
Oh no, you can do 255. That should be the same thing. Cool. Okay, I think that is most of what I've come prepared with. And I have a repo here that I'm going to drop the link to that has all except for the sign thing we just did, because that was kind of an impromptu thing. All of the things that we did together as code example links here. All the creative coding examples also, there are links here as well, just for your convenience. But if you wanted to kind of like, check back our code for the bouncing ball, for example, there's a p5.js editor link that you can kind of click on and look at. But there's also, all the code is in the folder as well. So if you're more, used to downloading code from your Git, from a Git repository and kind of working locally, you can also do that there too. And I also lastly added some link to resources. I skipped a lot of slides. I just kind of ran with it. I have a bunch of link to resources. The GitHub repo also is in the slides. Oh, the slides are also in the Git repo. There's a link to slides in here, and there's a static PDF version of the PowerPoint that I used today. I've linked the p5.js reference page. There's also, I'm sorry, I do work for Codecademy, so I get a little bit self-conscious every time I talk about Codecademy. But there is a Learn p5.js course. It is free because p5.js is an open source library, so we didn't want to make it pro. So it's free for anyone that has an account, and it should go into p5.js step by step, a lot more in depth than what I gave as a workshop today. Including things like media, which I didn't get to cover, but basically there are different ways that you can upload media, like videos and image files, and manipulate image and videos in there as well. So like, you can also do like webcam visualizations, do like live video visualizations using p5.js library as well. But I'm sure people are familiar with this. Daniel Schiffman, if you know him, he's a pretty big name in p5.js processing, sort of generative visualization culture. He's also a professor at NYU ITP, but he has a YouTube channel called The Coding Train that I've also included a link to here, and he does better job than I could ever, doing a walkthrough of how to create this sort of visualization. And there's a lot of videos that you can take a look there. There are the last two links are links to books. So there is a book called Getting Started with p5.js. That does an excellent job of, if you're more familiar or more comfortable with the book format, that's also a recommended book. And if you want inspirations for generative design, this is also an excellent book that talks about different kinds of generative visualizations. And there's a lot of pictures in here that I get inspired from a lot. But also those links are in the repo as well. Cool.
Awesome. Yeah, this is again, well done presentation. Lots of great examples, lots of great links and references. So yeah, just awesome all around. I was gonna ask about like your own like experience like doing stuff. It seems like you're pretty involved with like art and like web art. Like, is that just because you liked art to start with? Is that kind of why you dove into this topic?
Yeah, I think I originally wanted to do art, a lot of art. And I actually got into programming kind of accidentally because I got misplaced in a class in college. I didn't know that I signed up for Intro to Computer Science, and I went to first class and I went, actually, I think this is pretty cool. And that's kind of how I got into programming. I know that some people nowadays do a lot of programming in high school or even in middle school nowadays. It was not the case. I had no idea how to program before I went to college, and then got accidentally, was like, oops, I didn't know I was in this class, and then started learning programming. But because I've always had an interest in art, I kind of thought, okay, I guess I can combine these two together because there's like this cool, subsection of those two things together called creative coding. And that's how I got into it. I do, I guess I can go here. Do a lot of web-based art. So my kind of thing, there's two things. I like to do a lot of live motion capture using things like Kinect or depth sensing cameras. So
That's really cool, by the way. Yeah,
Thank you.
keep going.
I
Yeah.
worked a lot with dancers when I was in grad school, and then we had these like dance performances of like, you know, the screen moving and detecting where the dancer is in a fixed box of space, and then the visualizations kind of react to it. And then I've done a couple of I guess it's in here. I can't remember where things are on my website, but I have also these things where we've connected like Shanghai and New York together in one digital space, and they have people like interacting in the same space together. I think this is short. Oops. So there are people that are coming in and like, interacting with people that are not in the same space, but in the same digital space. So that's like one side of my interest. The other side of the interest, I'd say, is definitely like doing a bit more, you know, this is like a computer vision exercise where I put like a DSLR camera in front of my apartment window and tracked pigeon movements because this just happened to be like a building that attracted so many pigeons in my neighborhood. And it kind of came from the fact that I am absolutely scared of them. So
That's clever. No, that's great.
It's like an exercise to overcome my fears.
Yeah, you can definitely tell, like super creative, super creative.
Thank you.
What did you do with Google? I'm just curious, like the Google Summer of Code.
Oh, I built an app that connected microcontrollers to p5.js sketches. So if you are familiar with Arduino boards, you can connect them to your computer. And so basically connect whatever physical controller movements to the P5, or you can use p5.js to control your physical thing. So it's like a USB connection and like data, serial data app, electronic.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So you're connected those Arduino boards, and I guess are you using movement or something like that to basically like draw?
So any input. So like buttons, joysticks, whatever, anything that you take in as like a digital input and output, you can send it to a p5.js sketch, and they're connected via using peer networks, using WebSockets. So then you can, the idea is that, you know, you can also make your board wireless eventually, so that if you wanted to control something on a screen using it, you could do that. So it was kind of like a tool rather than like an artwork itself.
Very impressive. Just mind blown.
Thank you.
Just reading these comments too. So I guess I'll go in order.
Hey, can I ask you a question?
Go ahead.
So you mentioned the Kinect camera and other depth sensing cameras.
Yeah.
Since Kinects are hard to find, what is now the new hotness for those?
Kinects are hard to find.
Well, they were for a minute. Maybe they're back. I haven't looked in a little bit.
I've been doing a lot more work recently with Kinect 3, the newest ones that I don't know if they're hard to find, but definitely the lower versions are more difficult to find. So the caveat of using Kinect though is that you have to have a Windows machine, and the ones that work compatible with Mac is hard to find because they're more outdated. So maybe that's what it is. And I think it depends on what you want to do with them. So if you want to do something not like skeleton tracking, but kind of do blob detection and see how far or back people are to something, you can use depth sensing cameras. So one of them will be Intel RealSense. So they have a lot of different versions too. Their SDK is a little bit more dense, and their documentation is unfortunately a little bit more dense too. But these cameras also do quite, not that one. These cameras also do quite sophisticated depth sensing.
Cool.
So I would recommend that.
Nice, thanks.
Have you done anything with VR?
I have not done anything with VR, although it kind of seems like depth to VR is not a far loop. But I feel like I am maybe a little bit more old school in thinking that headset I have very little tolerance for something on top of my head and right in front of my face. I'm sorry, but and also I feel like a lot of the VR stuff you still need to get used to, you know, like Unreal or, you know, Unity, all that kind of stuff. So the whole game
Sure.
development engine isn't something that I am not I have not explored too much into.
Mm. I feel like you'd be a really great fit though, like if you did something like along those lines. But still, this is all really good stuff too, just, you know, keeping it P5 focused.
I
Yeah,
will
like,
say though, there will be a point in, you know, a lot of your journey of like, you know, visual programming, the P5 might feel a little bit limited. I will say check out 3JS as another library to explore.
sure.
3JS is another visualization library that is very focused on 3D environment. There's a lot of things in here that this is one of my favorite. It's called Paperplanes World, and it works with a mobile version of it too. So you can use your mobile phone to do a throw gesture and it will send a paper plane on your computer screen. It's crazy. So I'll drop this link in the chat if anyone wants to try.
Yeah.
But
That's
this
pretty
is
cool.
all rendered and built in WebGL using 3JS. So if you want to go to like the whole 3D realm of generative visualization, this is definitely the library to try use.
And you were saying that they teach this at NYU, right? Or is this Codecademy, like that they teach generative design? I was just curious.
You can take classes at NYU. You can take, you know, we have just, I think the P5 Learn P5.js is the only one that does generative visualization course in Codecademy. But NYU has classes. Also, ITP, Interactive Telecommunications Program, they have a camp. ITP, I can't type this. ITP camp. They have a camp every summer that you can do. It's like almost like a crash course of the whole program, I'd say. But it's like a 4-week thing every summer that you can also check out if you're into this. And there's a lot of ITP alumni come to this just to catch up with like everyone and like catch up with the tech world because it obviously moves so fast. And you can come and like hang out with people that are in the similar interest and, you know, spend the whole month doing this.
Yeah. This is cool. Any other questions, I guess, from the group?
Let's see.
Jiwon, I have a question.
Yeah.
This is Ian, by the way. So how long do you like? Let's say I'm a beginner to P5. Like usually, what's the duration to kind of know everything?
Oh, I'd say P5 is I would like to think that if you're not new to programming, so like if you're not learning JavaScript from scratch, it should be like maybe like a month. Like, you know, let's say you spend every day like an hour or so making a new sketch. By a month, you should be very familiar with it. It's not a difficult library to use. A lot of the functions and the way it works is very intuitive. I used to do a thing where I, you know, obviously did not have the patience for it to carry over with it. But people in my group of friends do a thing called 100 days of making. So you don't have to do 100 days. You could do 1 month of creative coding and you could spend like, you know, dedicate an hour of your time or as much time as you want doing a new sketch every day. And I feel like that's a great way to get, you know, familiar with P5 and like, you know, trying to draw inspirations from like Coding Train or any kinds of like I think Reddit has a generative thread, a subreddit that has a lot of great inspirations too.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that insight. Also about like how, you know, you'll do the stuff like the 100 days of creative coding, or I see that hashtag a lot on like Twitter and stuff like that. So is that generally you? I feel like you picked up a lot of different material, which I think like some people would find like really confusing just in isolation of that one thing. Like JavaScript is really, you know, it's easy to get into, but it gets very difficult, you know, as you start learning more and more. But then like, I feel like you kind of learned all these different things in parallel. You learned art, you learned inputs and like you're working with this P5 library and you were able to dive deep into it. Is that just because like, you spent a lot of days doing that iteratively? Like, is it a year? Is it 2 years? Is it like, what are we seeing? Like, when we meet you, like, what is the end result? How long have you been doing all these different things?
I have been in like education space for a little while, not too long, a little while. I'd say I taught a lot of these like intro to P5, intro to programming things when I was in NYU Shanghai as a resident fellow there for 2 years. So a lot of, I think, my experience like teaching new content comes from that experience. And then during one of my grad school times, I was teaching fellow for the entire 2 years of being there as well. And, teaching classes definitely help, trying to refine sort of the flow and trying to figure out what points are going to be like good things to introduce to people as a crash course. So I guess it's like an iterative process that you have. I was definitely not very good at it when I first taught stuff like this, as I don't think a lot of people are good at it, good at teaching when they do it for the first time. It's definitely a skill to master, I think, because it's a bit of like performance, but also being able to read the room and trying to have people engage with what you're doing as much as possible, which is something that I've been making conscious effort in doing, which is why I've been asking a lot of questions in this workshop. And it's also ever so hard over Zoom too, because you can't, if you were in like, or in the same workshop space, I can kind of like walk around the room and like take a peek at everyone's like screen to kind of see whether they're like, caught up or anything. But I feel like that's why I ask more questions over Zoom. But yeah, I think it's X number of years of gathering.
Definitely. Nice. Any other questions, or should we call it a night? It is 7, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time.
Well, if anyone has any questions outside of things, I guess I should also, I'll drop my LinkedIn here too, if you want to connect outside of this. And yeah, I hope people got a decent introduction to p5.js and creative coding.
Yeah, for sure. Again, thank you for presenting, and everyone else, thank you for joining today. I know everybody's busy, but thank you for checking us out, checking out HackBuddy, checking out Jiwon. And yeah, just if in general, if you have more questions, you want to see more stuff, you want to see more in depth on P5 or any topic that you saw here, just reach out to me. I'll also drop in my LinkedIn once more. It's keep forgetting I have to type it out because I just didn't have it this time. So there it is right there, linkedin.com in VJ Extreme. And obviously too, like, everybody else here, the point of this group is to get better at like programming, coding, learning, building foundations. So I take it really seriously, and so like I want to help other people out, especially with these kind of contents, YouTube videos. That just makes me feel better. Like, I was also sort of a teacher in some different schools, and so part of me still wants to do that, even though now I'm like full-time programming. So yeah, just reach out to me if you have any questions, and if you'd like to do any projects together, you can always reach out to me. I have a lot of open source stuff doing myself. So thanks again, and hope we can have you again sometime, Jiwon.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. All right. See you all. Thank you all for coming. Good night.
Bye.